Hello, everybody. Welcome to Fridays at 5. I'm Karen Taylor of the Color Vowel chart. Joined here as our main feature today is our guest speaker and our main woman, Jennifer Campion. Everybody, a little bit of applause for the Jennifer. Jennifer has been preparing this topic of so much interest on action research and how we can explore color vowel through action research, especially the idea of, does it work? And if you think it does, how do you know it does? And how can you prove it does? Jennifer, you want to start us off?
Sure. Let me share. So, oops, I'm on slide 2 already. All right, so slide 1. How do you know it works? And so I decided this is really a call out to our collaborators, and you are all our collaborators. Color Vowel Action Research. And so in asking people to think about doing action research, one of the first on color vowel, the first question is, so what is the color vowel approach? It's more than just, I use the chart. You have to ask yourself, what does it mean to use the approach? What does it mean to be a color vowel trained teacher? And pretty much all of us are trained to some extent. And so I want to look at principles of teaching with color vowel. And this is a list of principles that Karen and I have been developing. We came up with the list and it's been evolving. And it's something that we've been looking at in our level 2 teaching, especially in the practicums. And so I thought this is a good place to start, because I think it puts us all on the same page as to what we're talking about when we talk about the color vowel approach. So
I'll just add that before we get into them, a lot of people have contributed to this over time, just as the whole approach itself. And a couple names I just want to mention, because you may not know that you're instrumental. Anna Delina, yeah, once again, your name comes up, as well as Andy Lawrence, who's not here, but you might recall that you were both at a workshop a while back. And he started the ball rolling by saying, you know, I've done level 1 and level 2 a couple times face-to-face. And he started sort of distilling the trainings, these face-to-face moments, into these themes. And that got me thinking about principles. So over time, this is where it has gone. And for everybody who has the Color Vowel Approach book, this is also shaped by the 7 threads that we present in the back of the book on pages 30 and 31. So you'll see a lot of connection between these threads and what you see here. Okay.
Yeah. And as we go through these principles, I want you to take note of any that surprise you, or any that are very reaffirming for you, some that maybe you go, oh, that's something I need to work on. Maybe take some notes, even just mental notes. And if any of you have any reactions to these that you want to share with us, feel free to send us an email, or let us know how you feel about these, because I'm sure I speak for Karen that we would really love to know what whether these speak to you as color vowel trained teachers. So all right, so first one, work with the spoken word before the written word. I'm gonna read them. I'm gonna let Karen add to them as she sees fit. So
all right, I'm going to limit myself to 3 sentences at most. How about that? Because
okay, that's good, because we'll keep it moving. Yeah.
Maybe I'll ask for a third. The written word gets enough press. Our students need time with the spoken word. And spoken English or spoken language is innate to humans. It is the foundation of language, whereas the written word is a culturally learned behavior that's built on the oral. Those are my 3 sentences.
Organize words by the stressed vowel sound or the color?
Organizing words by the stressed vowel sound is a way to organize what we hear when we listen to English, in the case of what we do. It provides students a way to make sense of what they hear and how they speak so that others can understand.
We need to prioritize prosody, the rhythmic behavior of spoken English.
If number 2 conveyed the idea of word stress, then number 3 is really about phrase and overall communication stress. So that big rhythmic musical behavior of spoken language in general. And that's what we do with chants. And you can hear it right there. That's what we do with chants.
And the reason is because that's the essential nature of English communication, that so much of what we communicate is tied up with that prosody. Encourage curiosity and playfulness.
Because it's fun. Because we know that our affective filters are lowest when we are doing something authentic and playful, and when we have opportunities to ask good questions.
Create time and opportunities for students to discover and notice language.
I think of this all the time because every time we're over explaining something, I think of it as stealing an opportunity for learners to figure that out with a lot of good support, but for them to actually figure it out from the data. And when I say data, of course, we're talking about, well-selected groups of words that are authentically from a given topic or a given purpose. But the students can do a lot of what teachers typically do for them. We want to put it in their hands. That was too many sentences.
Minimize the cognitive load. Talk less, demonstrate more, create opportunities to practice.
Let's just say that together. Minimize the cognitive load. Talk less, demonstrate more, create opportunities
and
practice.
It's done.
Mhm.
Give them time.
Yeah.
Share the floor. Approach spoken English language as a cohesive, coherent system. Seek ways to provide learners with data, not impressions or arbitrary rules. And if I could add, don't always say, oh, well, English, it's just crazy.
Yeah. And I would say Shirley and I have spent a lot of time with this idea over the years, where we come across language teaching systems that have cherry-picked words that just happen to all exemplify the rule that's being taught. There's something of an artifice in that and a deception. And so if you feel you're ready, and that takes some training, you can spend time with an authentic body of language and find the patterns, and students can too. So that faith that is mentioned here is, actually, I had the word faith in this sentence about 20 minutes ago, but it was, have faith. There are patterns in the way that we speak. It's not crazy. The spelling might seem off, but the language is not crazy.
Teach natural, real world, I can't say that, real world, authentic language. Be a descriptivist rather than a prescriptivist.
Yeah. So this, I think, is a big one. If descriptivist and prescriptivist are new to you, just write those words down, because they're so important to understand as a distinction. Prescriptivist is sort of the status quo of teaching language forever. That's the teacher that told you to never put an adverb in front of a noun, in front of a verb, like to boldly go, or that told you all of these things that are shameful if you do this in language. That prescriptivist notion, I think, has really turned with the tide, and it's so much more interesting to describe what people really do with language anyway. So there are a couple of reasons to go in that direction, in addition to it being the approach of the century. It is the way that we teach now.
Prioritize language that is most useful and relevant to the learner, especially their words.
Yeah. So I don't really need to say more than that. I think it's
this can be hard, I think,
Yeah.
because so many of us have textbooks or curriculum that we have to teach. This is the list of words you have to cover, you know, in this unit. But it doesn't mean that we can't find time to bring in the alternatives that maybe are more relevant.
Well, and you need to, if you are in a system that is requiring you to do certain things, I'll always urge you to be subversive. You know, you do have to push back. Nobody will know that it's not the best practice if you don't tell them. And so bringing in learners' words and insisting that that is central to their learning will send an important message when people make those kinds of decisions from the top.
And number 10, use a brain-based multimodal approach to language teaching. Bypass Broca's area.
And this is what we do so much of in our trainings, with our hands and with chants and so forth. But anything you can add to it that distracts us from our linguistic brain will give students an opportunity to really spend time and to achieve the kind of prosody and pronunciation that they want to, as well as the overall sense of fluency and grammar that comes with being an English speaker. Thank you.
Thanks. So I'm going to close that up for a second. And I'm going to say that given those principles, we need to ask ourselves, you know, do we follow those principles? And the only way to really know that is to be or to become what's called a reflective teacher. And so I think, is that a term everybody's familiar with? I mean, the idea of being reflective. Mm-hmm. And I think we all do it to a certain extent. You know, at the end of a lesson, you go, well, that didn't work, you know, and if you leave it at that, that doesn't serve you or your students. And I think most of us would go, well, why didn't that work? And well, you know, I didn't explain it really well, or I spent so much time explaining it, they had no time to do it, or, you know, those kinds of things. And so the next time you do it a little bit differently. And so I think we all have a certain comfort level with, you know, how we reflect. And, you know, so some of us, we just kind of think about it as we're driving home from class. But I would encourage you to think of other ways to be reflective. Think about journaling, actually sitting down and writing, whether it's in your planner or whatever, you know, how it felt, what really went well, and analyze that and what you want to do next time. Another way to be reflective, and this is going to push people's comfort a little bit, is to videotape yourself and to be an observer of yourself. I know that I had to do this for grad school, and I put off as long as I could watching that first video, but it is so revealing once you get over the, you know, I sound funny, I look fat, or whatever it is. But, you know, if it's just for you, usually you don't have to worry too much about filming your students, but, you know, looking at really listening to them, listening to how much you talk and how much they talk, and how you respond to their questions, how you're giving feedback. You know, you end up you know, if you can bring yourself to do it, and I really recommend it, you watch over and over again, I think, and get more and more. And then going beyond that self-observation is observing other teachers, and then reflecting on what they did, and you know, if they're open to it, discussing that, and then having them come and watch you. So that idea of peer observation without any kind of, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, nothing will happen as a result. You know, there's nobody grading you or anything. It's just, I want to see what you're doing. and I invite you to come and see what I'm doing, and let's talk about it. And that can be a very powerful thing, and not many people are comfortable with it, but it really, it can add so much to a program if people would be willing to watch each other. And then, and it's, I'm not saying, your supervisor, because that might be too scary, but, and then taking it to sort of the highest level would be considering taking all those things together really, and doing some classroom-based action research. And so that's sort of what we want to talk about today. Well, it is what we want to talk about today, not sort of. I think that's it there. Okay. So many of you are going, well, what is classroom-based action research? It sounds really scary and intimidating and something that only people with masters or PhDs do. And, here I am, I'm a volunteer teacher, and I don't have any training. This doesn't sound like something I could do, but really all it is taking all those ideas about being reflective and being a little bit more systematic about it, and being willing to write it down and to measure it. And this is a definition from a really excellent book that I'm going to be working with myself over a while, and it's this book, which is quoted right down here. It's sort of a guide to that. And so what we're asking, or what we're proposing, is that you consider doing this in your own classroom. So much of what we read about teaching and philosophies and approaches, are abstract and, theoretical, and really it needs to come out of the classroom rather than people write about it and tell us to apply it in our classes. Let's see what's really working in our classes, and tell academia what's really going on in language classrooms.
I'll just kind of add a little bit of context to that observation right there, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I was at University of Maryland, as you've all heard millions of times probably, but University of Maryland is where I was when I created the chart with Shirley. She was down the road at George Washington University. We were both ESL teachers at those institutions. And I was also teaching at American University a short while after the chart was developed. And so we were in these academic institutions, but not in the research or the PhD programs, or the places where research is done and where you publish or perish. And yet that's where a lot of what we learn to do in our master's degrees comes from. And a lot of what I learned in my master's degree was very valuable. So I'm not in any way disparaging the work that comes from those institutions and those academicians. However, what we find is a bit of a crisis with Color Vowel is that we don't have a lot of research that's done at that level because we're busy doing it. We're busy teaching, and we're busy developing and training. And it's all been basically on demand by the teachers. So who's going to answer the call? Is somebody from Harvard going to come and just say, we want to do research on you? I don't think I can wait. I don't think we should wait. So if we want to legitimize and make better known what it is that Color Vowel has to offer, we need to do the work to say what it does. So that's a bit of that background, is to put it back into people's hands.
Right. So this might all seem a little abstract to you all. So I'm going to give you an example of action research. And this comes from a little blurb that was written up in a textbook, actually, that I had. And so there were some teachers, and they wanted to see what corrective feedback actually did for their students. They wanted to know if it actually impacted the students' progress in any way. And it seems like an obvious thing, but let's they wanted to test it. So 2 teachers got together. They taught different sections of the same class, and over 7 weeks, one gave corrective feedback every time the students made a mistake with using the simple present progressive, especially that third person singular s, and using is instead of one of the other helping verbs. And one of them did not correct the students when they made those mistakes. And so they were teaching the same material and all that. Now, while during this 7-week period, each of the classes was observed by a group of teachers. So it was observed by the teacher from the other section, so they could see sort of what was happening, and some other teachers who were taking part in this research project. And then before and after the 7 weeks, they did a test, and it was identical at the beginning and at the end, and they to see how much progress the students made. And this was an oral test. And when they graded the tests and compared them, the result was no significant difference at all between the 2 sections. You would have, the expectation was that the class where the teacher was correcting the students would make more progress, but they didn't. So that was the research. I mean, they were just teaching, but they just were being a little bit more mindful about a certain aspect of their teaching. So what I thought we could do is break into breakout groups for just about 5 minutes. And what I'd like you to think about is, if you were one of the teachers involved in this, what would you have done maybe differently? Why do you think maybe they got these rather unexpected results? And maybe what would you have added or taken away or done differently in that little tiny 7-week study? So is that everybody good? Okay, so I think I can do breakout rooms, Karen, if I'm co-host. Yeah. How many are we? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I'm going to put us into 4 groups, 3 groups. Let's go in 4. I'm going to assign automatically. One group only gets 2, so let's do that. I'm going to recreate. I'm going to do 3 groups. Okay, there you go.
And so, Jennifer, are we clear on what we're doing?
So yeah, you're just talking about that study and what you would have done differently, or what you feel about it.
Great.
So.
Oh. All right. Welcome back, everybody. All right. Mic's open, please. Let us know. Do we have like somebody from each group that'd be willing to synthesize?
I can do synthesizing with my group. So
hi, Joan.
So we discussed about how it's disappointing to hear, their results. It was disappointing, but also I personally was not surprised. And it also helps to know, like, is there a certain definition to corrective feedback, or was it a broader idea? Like, if usually I am always repeating what a student says wrong and repeating it correctly, that's corrective feedback. But I call it more like indirect. Direct corrective feedback would be more, okay, that was wrong, we need to do it this way. And so, what kind of corrective feedback were they using? And then, we just discussed that, students are going to just keep making the same mistakes unless we interrupt that thinking and do something to, get the right thinking. You still have students that don't pronounce S's at the ends of words. And so now I'm like, with my literacy students, I say, always pronounce the S, always, 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 always. I'm just stressing it, in hopes that as they progress, that they will get into that practice.
Mm-hmm. Great. Another group?
I can talk for hours. I guess you guys can chime in if I miss anything. So I think our overall thing was about having students talking and having discussions about the mistakes that they're making and why they're making, and making them more aware of it and what possibilities are out there.
So would you have had one group?
We all kind of approach
having those groups and one not, or?
Yeah, we all kind of approach it in different ways. I do it in more of an exploratory style. So Anna was saying she specifically asks them, Anna, yeah, just.
Oh, we can't hear you yet.
Anna.
Sorry. So I don't think about grammar as being mistakes or not mistakes. I think about it as being choices. So I would ask, why are you making this choice? And to get, as Aviva was talking about, to get students to think about, like, why did I do it? Or noticing it, like noticing that you even made a choice here. So just the raising of awareness, which Lynn was talking about as well. So like Joan was saying, I wasn't at all surprised. I mean, I actually know this from teaching writing and grammar, that just repeating it is not going to get that level of awareness. The student has to be more active. So I think that if I was faced with this kind of research thing, I would say, well, geez, correcting their mistakes is as good as doing nothing. Then obviously I have to find something else to do. So just giving them the right answer is not enough. If I want something to change, I have to get them to be aware of the fact that they have a choice, and then aware of why they're making the choices that they're making. So usually there's some pattern, and it's often related to their first language. So then they're sort of surprised, like, wow, I'm using Vietnamese grammar with English words. And it's like a big surprise. And it's not a surprise, But I think we were all in our group saying sort of the same thing, but awareness and noticing and maybe exploring it a little bit more is what Lynn would say, or talking about it would be kind of the bottom line of what we came up with.
I just want to jump on that word noticing. Just speaking of, the research that's been done, there's whole bodies of research around noticing, just to kind of put a little thought out there. And it's fascinating. What can we do to set the stage for noticing? And how do you know that someone has noticed with a big N? Aviva's nodding her head. So you're aware of the noticing research.
Well, I mean, there's Scott Thornbury who talks a lot about noticing, and Paul Nation as well.
Yeah.
I think it's much easier to do if you're teaching written work. It's more difficult to notice when it's spoken English. So you have to direct your students very specifically towards noticing patterns. It's just easier to notice patterns when it's in front of you. Okay. I think I could be wrong.
Yeah. And that's why we have those discovery activities in the Color Vowel approach, and why we train with them, because those have prompts that are physical, words on papers, but they prompt oral noticing.
Yeah.
Trying to pin that kind of thing down, or flooding. Flooding's a way to notice as well.
And Peggy, we can't hear you, Peggy.
Yeah.
Peggy, you need to unmute.
Unmute, Alt-A.
There you
Can
go.
you hear me now?
Yes,
Yep.
we can.
Oh, good. Okay, well, our group said if you are doing a scientific study, which this was,
Mhm.
you probably would get better data, if you had more than just somebody correcting all the time, every single mistake for every fluff, and somebody not doing anything, and instead had, and we mentioned, more than one way of getting people to think and self-correct. If you had teacher A doing nothing, teacher B doing everything, just interrupting all the time, and teacher C doing method X of correcting, and next teacher doing method Y, you need to have more than one method of correcting to see what really works. If that shows that none of the methods made any difference whatsoever, then you also have to look at the fact that, well, we didn't know what the results were. Did the results show that both groups had progressed? If that was true, they were learning from somewhere. Maybe the book or the recordings were so good that everybody learned regardless of what the teacher did. Or if the results show that nobody learned anything, then you say, okay, something is terribly wrong here. What is it?
Right.
So we need more details, some more
A little bit more, yeah.
Yeah.
I believe that was that they didn't progress, I think, and
None of them?
yeah.
And it's
None of
not,
there was
not
very
on
little.
language overall, it's on specifically on the use of particular grammatical patterns. Is that right, Jennifer?
Right. And part of it is that in acquiring English, that third person S and that plural S are in fact one of the very last things that learners acquire. It doesn't, and you know, it's always the very first thing we teach, and then we complain because students do it. But actually the brain, that is one of the last things that students actually acquire naturally. So that's one thing. And somebody brought up is, what is feedback? And I think that's really very, very, when you're looking at this kind of a research question, is there are different kinds of feedback. There's direct and indirect feedback. I mean, I could just repeat your mistake. I could say something like, you, and you let the student, you're basically cueing them that there is a mistake. So there's lots of different kinds of feedback, and I think that would have to be specified. The other thing that struck me about the way this was described is that you have a whole cadre of teachers, this big block of teachers in the back of class, and I don't know about your students, but I think my students would be pretty nervous, and so they might, I mean, just the fact that you had a bunch of researchers in the back of the room might have made it less of a natural learning situation, and you know, the nerves of the students might have that might have affected it. So anyway, I thank you. I mean, it was just sort of an idea to show you what classroom-based action research is. These were not researchers that were coming in and doing this. These were actually teachers who wanted to investigate in order to see how they could improve their own teaching. And so there are reasons for wanting to do research. It's mostly to improve yourself, but also perhaps to improve your program, to share information with your peers. There are lots of different reasons for doing it. Let me go to this next slide here, because our time is moving on. All right, right here. So when you're talking about action research, this is a very general outline of what happens. First of all, you have to brainstorm your ideas. You write a research question or two, and your research question has to be pretty specific, and you want to be as narrow as possible. And there's lots of other things about research questions, and we'll talk about that in a minute. You want to determine who's going to do the teaching, what you're going to use, who are the students, what you're testing, what materials you need, when you're going to do it, where you're going to do it. You need to determine how you're going to measure your results. So what are your tests? Or do you need something before and after? Is it going to be a paper test, an oral test? Will you maybe do some interviews with teachers, interviews with students, things like that? Then you go ahead and you perform your research, whether it's, one day or an entire semester. You look at your results, interpret them, and then you summarize it and present your research to whomever. It might be, you did it for just yourself, then, you might want to just reflect on that. Whereas if you're doing it for the other teachers in your program, you might want to present to them, or you might want to present the results to your supervisor, your administrators, if your goal was to show something about the curriculum or the approach that the whole program is taking. Or again, as we talked about, you might want to present to a larger audience. So Karen and I have been thinking about this and discussing how we really she and I don't have the opportunity to be in the classroom and seeing how this is working. And we want so much to know how it's working for you all, and what and start to gather some of this data about Color Vowel and how it works. And so our question to you as teachers who are using Color Vowel, what is it that you want to know about how Color Vowel works? No, I mean, it's easy to have a yes, no question. Does it work? But what is it about Color Vowel that intrigues you? And so we'd like to kind of brainstorm ideas for action research about Color Vowel. And I know our time's getting low, but really what Karen and I want to do is we thought we would have sort of an action research support group as an initiative for the coming year. What we envision is something maybe meeting once a month. I think twice a month might be too much because you're all so busy, but at least once a month getting together. And we would talk about we would go step by step through the process. So, the first week or the first month in January, we'll talk about the questions and how to write a good research question, the fact that it shouldn't be really a yes, no question. And then, you'll come back and you'll share that. And in February, we'll start talking about, designing your research. And, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about assessments, and, we'll just take it step by step and work together. And, we'll support you as much as possible, and you'll support each other. And we've been talking a long time about having a Color Vowel conference or unconference. And so we were thinking if we aim to have some kind of a conference towards the end of next year, those of you who have done this research, even if you're not done yet, you could come, and it would be a very informal kind of thing, and you could share that, get some experience. If you've never presented before, this would be a way of presenting. And as I said, you could just say, well, I'm not done yet. I've done, I've done the research, but I haven't, really observe my results, and get feedback from people, and maybe find out what they're interested about in your project. And then for those of you who have the idea of maybe I can go to my area TESOL conference, or Big TESOL or any of these other pronunciation conferences, there's sort of a conference season in the spring and the summer. And so you might, this is an opportunity to do a dry run and before you go to a big conference. So, but anyway, that's our thought. We'd like to do initiative, and we've only got a few more minutes. So if we want to maybe take some time to think about some questions that we could be asking about Color Vowel and how it works, why it works, and what's, well, and I'll shut up. I'm going to reduce my teacher talk time. Aviva.
Hi, Aviva.
Yeah. Well, we're in the middle of doing two things right now. The first thing that we did is we had a group of international teaching assistants, and we recorded them before we taught them Color Vowel and before they used Blue Canoe, and we recorded them at the end of their 8 weeks of using Color Vowel and Blue Canoe, and we had them do a reflection where they talked about the use of the chart, and they talked about not only the chart, but they talked about the use of the Color Vowel method, and they talked about Blue Canoe. And it was very interesting, but the questions weren't good enough. Okay, they weren't informative enough. But what we did see was that there was huge progress in terms of use of thought groups in particular. Okay, in terms of thought groups and in terms of identification of focus words and of the peak vowel within focus words. So to me, it was clear that whatever they had been doing, okay, with the pronunciation course that they've been going through, okay, it had an effect on how they thought about grouping their language and about where they put the stress. Which I think is a big success personally, because they suddenly became much more comprehensible and much more intelligible. And now we're doing it with our in our intensive English program with several of our sections. And it would be great to teach one section Color Vowel and not teach another section Color Vowel, but we can't do that. We have to teach everything.
You need a control group. Yeah, you need a control group.
Actually, you don't have to have a control group in all groups. You don't.
How can you?
I mean, there's change. You can do pre-post testing so that you have, before and after, and it's not as constraining as all that, because it'd be hard to say I'm going to withhold a whole way that I teach. For example.
Yeah,
it's impossible.
Yeah. That's kind of one of the differences between classroom-based research. I mean, you don't have to have, all of the constraints that you have with
Can you still get it published and get it taken seriously?
Yep, there are ways to structure it. Definitely.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So comparisons of attitudes are a way to do action research. Action research, though, more is about outcomes in the classroom. So it might be attitudes in the classroom that you can measure. Or I'm curious, Aviva, how did you document or how did you notice systematically changes in thought groups? That's fascinating.
Well, because what we did is we got them to record themselves at the beginning of the course. And then we got them to record themselves using similar topics and similar questions at the end of the course. And then what you do is you compare the before and the after, and it became very clear that the students were organizing their speech deliberately, okay, around thought groups, and that they were paying attention to intonation and they were paying attention to the focus word. And I mean, these are very motivated students who have to teach other students. They're GTAs, they're graduate teaching assistants, so they have to be intelligible in the classroom. So for them, it was a big deal, okay? And it was noticeable. Now, I have to organize the material, etc., but and where I think that the research fell down was when I asked them individually to reflect on the use of, let's say, Blue Canoe, or of the Color Vowel method, I don't think my questions were good enough. Okay, I don't think that I got enough specific data. But observationally, looking for specific thought groups, focus word, peak vowel stress, I saw a huge difference. Sorry, Doug.
So one avenue of research would be to see color vowels effect on sort of this higher prosody production. Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, but Aviva, that you had English teachers as opposed to English learners, is that right?
No. These were international students who are doing their masters or their doctorates, but they have a job at the university teaching undergrads. Okay, let's say chemistry, math,
sciences, or math, or that kind of thing.
So they're not English learners. These are people who have a high level of proficiency, but aren't necessarily comprehensible or intelligible. Okay, so I did a screening for these people to check, you know, are they comprehensible? Are they intelligible? Have they had experience in an American classroom? And if they weren't, according to my judgment, comprehensible enough, then they had to undergo this pronunciation training course, which was an online course that I prepared, and it was modular, so they could do the modules at their own time within the 8 weeks. And they had to do Blue Canoe, and the color vowel was introduced, and all of these aspects. So these weren't English learners. These were people who had to teach in the university, but nevertheless, even if they had vocabulary and grammar, they weren't comprehensible.
Well, they were learners in the fact that they were not native English speakers.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. They're the very population with whom I developed the chart in the first place. International teaching assistants, by the way. Interesting. So yeah, I thought, we're winding things up, and I wanted to share with you as just food for thought, the end of a presentation of a colleague in Vietnam who recently did some action research with the color vowel chart. And he asked a very simple question. I just show this because it displays just how it's sitting right in front of us. The question was, does the chart help students recognize and name vowel sounds? That was the question. And all of us are like, well, of course it does. That's its purpose. But he took that as his main question, and he created a study around it, and he's published it. So, he already has that in some kind of a journal in Vietnam. And so he was able to do that with 30 participants. And let me just grab, I want to be sure I say his name. So let me grab that. This is Kong Hui Nguyen. And so he shared this with me, and I'll just share it briefly with you with this slide. Come on, Taylor, where did it go? There we go. I'm just going to show the very ending of his findings. And I think a lot more could be done. He agreed with that, but he started out with 30 participants, and he used a questionnaire measuring students' attitudes toward the color vowel chart. And so he devised that, and there were 19 participants in that. I have to follow up to understand the difference between these two numbers. But, just as an idea, he simply wanted to know, does this help you? And he asked that through questionnaire. And so the findings were, you want to, let's see, does it help you to be confident about pronouncing vowel sounds? And a vast majority agreed, yes. Did it help you learn to pronounce new words more easily? And there was a strong sense of yes. So this is stuff that we see on students' faces, but he decided to measure it. And if I thought, when I came across this over the summer, I thought, wow, if he can ask this very essential question, think of all the other questions we can ask too. Did it help you hear the vowel sound stressed syllable more clearly? Strong yes. Would you like to continue to study, in this case, phonetics? These were graduate students studying phonology of English who are themselves Vietnamese. Okay. And they said yes. Okay. And so that's just an example. And here here's some conclusions. There are always limitations to research. You can acknowledge that. You know, you can acknowledge that we did not use a control group because it didn't make sense to, or that it was a small n, a small number of participants, all of that. So just an idea of how simple it can really be of a question, and then how that question leads to more questions. And the big holy grail question is, does it really improve spoken English outside of class? You know, and anyone who wants to pursue that, I will be right there to support you every step along the way.
Right. So we envision this as a, you know, sort of an ongoing project and collaboration. And we'll be putting more information about it in the newsletter. And, you know, so we invite you to take some time to think about it. And does this intrigue you? If it intimidates you a little bit, step forward into that and embrace that. And, you know, it could be a great challenge, but more than anything else, we see this as a form of teacher development. And, you know, your career development, you know, but just as a teacher, what is it that you would like to know, and how could you go about exploring that with your students? So
It's also a really essential skill for advocating for your students, so that when you go to your admins and say, I want this for the students because it helps them, and the admin says, well, I've never heard of it, how do you know? And you say, I know this because here. And suddenly, oh, wow, you have a lot of support here. So whether that's attitude evaluations and questionnaires, or something that gets more at the language skills, all of that's going to be helpful to you and your learners.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to thank you. I appreciate the comments here from folks that this has been helpful. Any closing thoughts from you all, from anyone in the room, of what you would like to see moving forward, or just any thoughts you had today?
I just wanted to mention one more thing in terms of the principles. You had 10. I have like maybe one more, which makes for 11, which is not wonderful, but maybe it folds into one of the other 10. And I think one of the more dramatic sort of things for me was, and Karen, you've talked about this so much, is that the idea that we're not treating English as a subject. That is, we're not training scholars of English, we're training users of English. And that's an important distinction, especially if you work in an intensive English institute, or you're working with more advanced, you treat everything as a subject, whether it's the grammar, the pronunciation. And that, I mean, it's a subtle shift, but it's just huge in terms of the impact. And then you can start thinking about things like making things easier, throwing out the IPA, and, just dealing directly with students instead of getting them, throwing out questions on tests like, what is the most common vowel sound in English? Who cares? I mean, we care, but you're not training teachers, you're not training scholars of English. The point is not to understand English. The point is to be able to use English. And it's just, I mean, that was like a huge piece for me, and a huge shift, because I tended to be very much into like, you have to understand how it all works and stuff, and you don't. You just have to learn how to use it. So I think that isn't, I mean, to me, that was like a first principle.
I don't think that's included in any of those. And I mean, we could all just be mavericks and say 11. You have to sit with 11.
Come up with one more for 12.
Yeah. But I thank you, Anna, for mentioning that, because it's actually just come up over in this. I'm in this group of linguists who aren't phonologists, and that's been a big discussion this week, is the extent to which in the classroom so often spoken English is taught as phonology, basically. Phonology for second language.
Yes, exactly. Right.
Like, wait a minute, what are we doing here? Yeah,
exactly right. And we did the same thing with grammar. So I've actually taken that principle and moved it into what I do with grammar. It's I mean, the principle is exactly the same and has exactly the same effect.
That's what we're going to talk about in the January workshop on grammaring. Because, you know, the idea of grammaring is the fifth skill. It's not something that you know, study about. It's something you do.
Mhm.
So we'll be talking about that in January.
Dawn wrote something interesting about the study. You know, might it help to give us topics to divvy up? And I think that would be a good work group kind of thing, and that deserves maybe another coming together to identify those. But I know right now that we've got two main areas of interest. One, it would be about the method. You know, for example, does having students use the open hand and insisting on it and really working on that in one group, does that improve their spontaneous speech, right? And you could find easily a control group for that, where you simply don't push the open hand of the student and you model it, but you don't insist that they use it. That would be kind of a pretty easy control. I mean, just a thought. But methodological kinds of questions is one. And then the other would be about Blue Canoe, right? And that would also be a pretty easy control, is to have one group using Blue Canoe consistently and another not. So those are just kind of the kinds of ideas that we're interested in. And Blue Canoe, of course, offers, with the dashboard and everything, you can actually monitor how often they practice. And you could add in features of how well do they practice, and then what impact does that have? Okay.
So yeah, if the use of Blue Canoe, or, you know, using the chart is something that you would really like to see grow in your program at your school, if you're the only color vowelist right now, this, you know, think about what might help persuade the other teachers in your program to be doing it. Or if you really want to get Blue Canoe for everybody, what would help prove to your administration that Blue Canoe really works? Yeah.
I think another piece is, I mean, we've been focusing on what happens with the students and like how they improve. But I think another intermediary sort of research is the effect that it has for you, the teacher. So how does it affect you if you start using Blue Canoe instead of, you know, like you're using green tea instead of make a smiley face or do a kissy face, and, you know, all the other things that people try to do to try to talk about the vowel sounds. There was nothing there. Or the teacher who insists that without IPA, you cannot teach it. Like, you know, that's the only accurate way, you know, to convey the sounds. So, you know, maybe to try it and tell yourself, I'm going to not use IPA. I'm not going to use smiley face and kissy face. And, you know, I'm going to use this system. And what effect does it have on my teaching, on my confidence, on my ability to communicate? And that feedback can come from the students. I mean, that's how I got it at first, because I started using it in spelling, and I, you know, was just clomping along. And then at the end, the students were actually the ones who say, this is so much more comprehensible than anything else you did before. You know, like they saw a before and after period, you know, with the spelling. And then I thought, okay, well, I guess I'm going to pay attention to this, you know. So that's not about the students. That's really about you, the teacher. And then, you know, it's just so much easier than using the IPA. I was so happy to get rid of that.
It would be interesting to do a tally. How many times do we just subconsciously use it in class?
Right. And that goes back to reflective teaching, of recording yourself and just saying in a given session, how many times do I say, oh, what color is that? Or how many times does a student say, what color is that? You know, how many color vowel references are there?
And perhaps how that changes over the semester.
Yeah.
You know, how much they start using it. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm really excited about the possibility of working together. And, you know, but I really, putting out that call, I don't want anyone to feel like we expect you to do all of it or know how to do it, that we would all learn together how to do that. Take it.
I want to thank all the comments over in the chat. Lots of different ideas going on, and I appreciate that. Dawn's holding up. Hold that up one more time, just so people know. That's Color Vowel Duo, which is the original game it was named.
I
before
finally
became
pulled it
Color
out
Vowel.
of one of my classrooms and had to tape on my rose boat and my red pepper.
Yeah, wonderful. No, Dawn's one of the early adopters of Color Vowel. She's been with me since something like 2011 or 12 or something like that. And yeah.
Have the cards and their distribution and stuff changed as well?
You mean in terms of the deck
Of
you
the
have and the
game?
deck I have? Are we asking a color it
Right.
out question?
Yeah.
Yes, the cards have been more thoughtfully paired in the latest print edition.
We got
So
like
that-
10 of them back when we first started. And so we've got
Yeah.
them in all our classrooms and they don't really go bad. So it's
They
just been
don't.
hard to. Wow.
But every card has a potential sentence that's like pretty logical, right? Like you could say, "Oh, I found a bicycle," and so they're mini sentences as well as cards to play the games with, and I mean there are all kinds of options. So yeah, it did change a little.
And it's a nice box now.
It's a beautiful
Really
box,
nice
right? No, Dawn, we have, those are the days. That was the prototype before the patent. Yeah. Wonderful, everybody. Thank you so much for your time and energy being here today on a Friday and until 6:15 practically.
Oh my gosh.
We took your names down and let's do this again. And we're really going to move forward with some topics and potential, if you like to work with others, work groups, and if you like to work on your own, we're here to support. So all of these options are possible. Yeah. Have a wonderful, safe weekend and be well. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Come on.
Have you got all the chat comments, Karen? Because